On today's episode of Evolving Politics, I talk with Senator Buck Newton about the political landscape of North Carolina. Well, welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you started out working for Jesse Helms.
Yes, once upon a time, that was my first real job that I had. Was after college, went up to Washington and got lucky, pounded on doors, and dropped resumes everywhere, and just kind of got in the right spot at the right time, and got a little job on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator Helms was the ranking member on the minority staff. Mm-hmm. The Republicans were in the minority then, and so that was my first, I would say, real job, and after college.
What did you do in that job?
Well, it was mostly administrative work,
mm-hmm.
but we were, because we were in the minority, we had much less resources and staffing than the majority. So that really meant I got to do a lot of things that I probably wouldn't otherwise get to do or be qualified mm-hmm. to do. I met a lot of... I had to attend meetings, in lieu of other people, and so, like one of the funniest stories, or one of my biggest memories, was picking up the last president of Yugoslavia at the General Aviation Wing at Dulles Airport at about 1:00 in the morning. That was drove my little Bronco 2 out onto the tarmac, and. Yeah, that was an interesting story. So,
where'd you have to drive them from Dulles to?
So back into D.C.
You had to drive them from Dulles to D.C.?
They flew in. A little bit of background. So Yugoslavia at the in 91, if I remember my dates correctly, summer of 91, really came unglued, and that's when it began breaking apart into Croatia and Serbia mm-hmm. and Bosnia, et cetera. Went right out of my head. The Slovenia and some of the other countries, and so they had an interesting look. I need to be careful not to make people's eyes roll back in their head with this, but they had an interesting governmental arrangement, and so they had a rotating presidency. So, mm-hmm. One term would be a Serb, another term it would be a Croat, and so, but they had elections, but it would have to rotate around, and so it happened to be that the president was a Croatian, and when the country came apart, the primary fault line was between the Croatians and the Serbs. And that was from history of World War II, and without going through all of that. But so he flew over with a bunch of aides and supposedly was going to deliver a lot of documentation on where, like, chemical weapons and things like that had been kept in the former what became the former Yugoslavia, and really. He was searching for alliance and aid, from America, and right. And I suspect probably trying to get out of Dodge, and I wouldn't be surprised if probably brought some money over and put it in the bank in case they had to flee,
right.
that kind of thing. But so they flew over on a charter jet, a crowd of them, and I never expected it, but. I had to go out there on the tarmac with some Secret Service Suburbans, and the luggage went in my car, and some of the aides went in my car, and we had a hard time keeping up with Secret Service Suburbans when they were driving back into Washington, mm-hmm. and we had an escort. They were closing, the on ramps and things like that onto. I-66. It was interesting. So I learned a lot. Let me not digress into that too deeply, but I learned a lot. My time there, I learned a lot from Senator Helms. I didn't get to spend a lot, like daily. I didn't get to spend lots of time with him, but periodically, I had to take things to him on the floor, and a lot of administrative work. So speeches that would be written, I might carry drafts down there to him, or get approval for letters that had to be done, stuff like that.
Right.
And but it was my job was mostly administrative work. And as a young guy out of college without a PhD in international relations or something like that, it was primarily my daily duties were administrative. But you got, we were, like I said, we were understaffed because we were in the minority. So I was a live body, and they figured out, I think they figured out within a few days that I wasn't stupid, and that I could be responsible and do things. And the funny thing was, and you guys, you and guys should appreciate this. I was like the technology whiz, so I knew how to do all the at the time all the software that all the folks that were working there struggled with, and newer things, and so it was kind of interesting.
From the bits you did get to be around him, what was he like?
Oh, Senator Helms was a consummate gentleman. He was very, very, very interested in the young folks and helping them, curious about their circumstances, how they, no matter whether they were a page or whether they were visiting or whether they were doing an internship or first jobs, they was very, very interested in them, and cultivating their kind of political outlook, and making sure they were aware and had opportunities. He was very, I think, down to earth is a good way to put it. Sometimes folks that get elected to places like that, they tend to try to be above. I shouldn't say try. They tend to get to a place where they think they're kind of above other folks. In the Senate, they have a special elevator for senators only. Senator Helms, if you were standing there waiting on an elevator and he was getting on that elevator, you got on that elevator with him. He made you do it. He was not going to leave you stand. It didn't matter who you were. You weren't going to stand there if you weren't a senator and not get on the senator's elevator with him. You were going to ride the elevator with him. Same thing with the cars. They'll have a little tram that runs from the offices over to the Capitol building, and he would make sure you were not walking because he was riding, that kind of thing. And he got along really well with people in the other party.
Really?
Yes, he was a strong, very, very strong, philosophically strong, ideologically strong conservative, as everybody who knows anything about him should know that. But his public persona and his private personal interaction with people was quite different. How he was made out in public was very different than who he was in person. There was a senator from Illinois, very, very liberal Democrat, named Simon, and he and he had a bow tie. And this, I'm dating myself. This was a long time ago, but he and Senator Simon were the best of friends. And there's a reason why all these Democrats like Joe Biden came down to Senator Helms' funeral when he passed. And I know I didn't ever perceive Senator Biden and Senator Helms to be all that close, but they had to work together a lot because Senator Biden was on the Foreign Relations Committee, and so we dealt with his office a lot. So when he was running for president, I had an opinion. I'll just put it like that. I had a pretty strong opinion before everybody else did. So.
Well, it's surprising that he had good relations with the other parties. I mean, if you look into the media during that time, I mean, he was slandered a lot in the media. And I remember he was characterized Senator No, which I take that as a good thing because, he was very much for state rights.
One of the things I'll say about Senator Helms that I learned, and it's been of great benefit to me is I've been in the legislature, in North Carolina legislature as a senator. Senator Helms really did know how to make a deal. Now, a lot of people thought, because his persona was such, that he was inflexible, and he couldn't. Where he was inflexible was on his real principles. He was not going to violate deeply held principles. Now, if he was getting 90% of what he wanted, he could make a deal with him. It didn't have to be 100%, but his persona was such that people thought he had to have it all his way all the time, and that wasn't it at all. I remember one time some people came out of his office, and I knew who they were. I was waiting outside the office for directions, basically after the meeting, to communicate back to my boss and what were we going to say. And this is all before social media, right? Mm-hmm. So nobody was tweeting. There wasn't email, right?
Right.
So to the extent there was any kind of public statement, it was the equivalent of a more old-fashioned press release, if that makes sense. And so I was waiting for them to come out, and they came out, and they came down, and they came out, and to my eye, they looked like they had smiles on their face, and so I went into Senator Helms's office, and so I'm getting directions about what the meeting was about, and I don't want to oversell this. Like, I was just a courier, so to speak. I was a messenger. I didn't, but he made it pretty clear to me that that they thought that they had gotten away with something, and he got everything he wanted. He was happy, about it. And now his personality and his public style was very different, but it reminds me in some ways of President Trump, in that he was a really good negotiator, and his perception of being somebody that was very adamant about getting what they wanted paid dividends for him in negotiations, because he could get usually, and when he didn't get what he wanted, or when it violated his principles, he was Senator No, and he stopped a lot of stuff. And he argued with the Republicans almost as much as he argued with Democrats. I was in there during the time when the first President Bush was in office, so this was right before President Clinton was elected in '92, and so a lot of Secretary of State Baker had a lot of interaction with the Foreign Relations Committee, and this was a very interesting time in the world, because this was really after the Soviet Union, during that time when the Soviet Union came apart, and so you had a lot of realignment around the world, and we kind of won the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. We were the really only superpower, so to speak, left in the world, and so there was lots of adjustment. And some of the problems we have today in the world are leftovers from that time. Ukraine is probably the number one example I would use, the war in Ukraine right now, and so it was a fascinating time to be around and have I like to call it a front row seat, not really be in the game, but be in the front row, because that's, although I was involved in things, it was a very minor role, and so. But I learned a lot from him. I think that answers your question. He was a big influence on my political philosophy, a big influence on I think my view of how to get things done, and legislative process requires you to compromise at times. But the rules are very different, of course, where I work than it was in the U.S. Senate. And the filibuster was still something that carried a lot of weight there in the U.S. Senate, and we don't have the filibuster in the North Carolina Senate. So,
Well, could you describe your political journey after Senator Helms?
sure, I'll back up just a little bit before that, because I was involved in politics and had an interest in politics. I studied political science in college. One of my first jobs, but I wouldn't call it a career job. I worked on a congressional campaign in 1990 for a congressman named Cass Ballinger, who was in the 10th District of North Carolina. So I'd done a lot more on the kind of the campaign side of things, and I'd been a House page in the General Assembly. It's actually where I met my wife, was when I was a House page in high school. And so I was always interested, and I was always leaned more on the Republican side of things, and saw myself in that light. And Ronald Reagan was a big, that was the time when I grew up, was when Reagan was president. And so, I graduated high school in '86, so that puts it in a little bit in perspective. So I graduated high school at the end of his, towards the end of his second term. So those were my formative years, and so Reagan had a big influence as well. And of course, Senator Helms and President Reagan were close, and Senator Helms had a lot to do with his success in winning the presidency in the first place. In North Carolina was one of the places where Reagan did really well, and did well in the primary that he lost to Gerald Ford, and then again in 1980. So when he won the nomination and then the presidency. So those were kind of my formative years, and so that was my lens in college when I was studying in political science. And when you study Marx and Lenin, as you should, if you study political science, it was helpful to have a firm foundation and free market, non-Marxist ideology, and understand what was right and what was wrong, And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but it was a natural for me, not really knowing what I wanted to do with myself, that I would that I would try to go to D.C. and work for at least a few years, and then later when I realized that, and I knew I never really planned to stay in D.C. all that long. It just wasn't something I thought would be like a career. And I always thought I would somehow get into business or do something. I thought I might one day come back to Washington, maybe, maybe as an elected official, but it would be after a career that I might do that. Not you raise a family, make your money, so to speak, and that running for office might be like a second career. That was just sort of my view of it. But I was always involved on the campaign side because I cared deeply about who was elected, and working for Senator Helms really probably honed that to a razor edge, that I cared about who was being elected, because I did have the experience of seeing a lot of different types of political characters in Washington, no matter what party you're talking about. And I could see the difference. Let's just talk about the Democrats. I could see the difference between the Democrats, and some I thought were just kind of what a lot of people think politicians are, in it for themselves, not reliable, not intellectually honest, potentially dishonest, playing a game. And then you could see others that even though I disagreed with them completely on what their approach to public policy was, what their goals were and agenda, you could tell that they were sincere and they believed it, and they weren't doing it really for themselves. It wasn't a career for them. It was trying to make a difference, and usually their goals were their end goals were generally the same or worthwhile. I will give them that much. But the way they wanted to do it was typically big government, big tax, federal government telling everybody what to do, and we had the same problems today.
Right.
And so I honestly thought my involvement in politics would be a lot more campaign oriented, helping to find the right candidate, helping to make sure that they had the right people working for them. I saw how much staff mattered. My time in D.C. really taught me that. Staff has a lot of power, a lot of influence, they're gatekeepers in a lot of ways. And so, making sure people have good advice and good counsel is really important. If young people want to get involved, that's one of the things that they need to think about, because being in office is not for everybody, and not everybody. Not everybody wants to do that, but being in a place where you can almost have your finger on the wheel by working for somebody who's in office and helping elect the right people. I mean, who we elect matters. If they're a crook, I'm not going to name names in this podcast. I think everybody's got a list in their mind of people who they think are bad politicians and they'd like to see locked up, to go to a phrase that now everybody's not supposed to do because, we all have our ideas about who's good and who's not. And that's a way that, but there's also, helping get the right people elected. You don't even have to be on their staff. You can go be a volunteer for their campaign, or, when you're in the business world and you start your career, you can help raise money for them, because you can't get elected without raising money. Unless you are in a position to write your own check, you just can't do it without raising money. I mean, even local races require raising money. I mean, yard signs cost money. Doggone, those things cost a lot of money these days, and whether that is effective or not is another debate. But social media ads cost money. You can do. It's the same thing as what we used to call earned media with mainstream media on the news. Doing an interview like this, and so things evolve. Podcasts will probably one day be looked at as old-fashioned,
right?
But it's really no different from doing the interview with the news anchor on the local television station, or doing an interview with the newspaper. Back in the day, there's not a video to go with it. It's maybe not recorded back then, but it's recorded in print. It's an evolution of it.
Right.
So, there's a lot of ways to help people. Help the right people, and good candidates sometimes need a lot of coaching. The first time they run, they don't know what they're doing. They think they know what they're doing, but they don't. I'm talking about being a candidate. They might know exactly what they're doing in terms of what's right and what's wrong and what they're for and what they're against, but that's not the same thing as running a campaign, and not the same. And how do you say things matter? You can be for something and say it in a way that turns off a lot of people. And you can say, I'm for this a different way, and people are more receptive. But you're saying the same thing, or you're going for the same thing. It's not misleading anybody. It's like, I don't know if you've ever been in the position where you're coming home and your parent wants to know how you did on the test.
Oh, that's true.
So you might say, well, better than I thought I was going to. And that might be true. But it still might not be what you wanted to make on the test, right? And so, I mean, I just use that as an example. Candidates need help, and they need help connecting with the right people. When I say the right people who are going to vote. It does no good to talk to people who aren't even going to vote. It doesn't do any good to talk to people who are not persuadable. Okay, and there's a lot of people that you potentially can persuade, but then there's a lot of people that you're not going to persuade.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also people you don't need to talk to because they're going to vote for you anyway.
Right.
And so it's not that you don't want to pay them attention, it's that you got limited time, limited resources, limited access to people. And, when you're in a campaign, you have to go talk to people that are persuadable and try to convince them that you're the right candidate and that your agenda, by and large, is what they ought to be for. Nobody agrees with any candidate 100% of the time. So, that's where candidates can use coaching, is how to not argue about the one issue that potential voter or that group of voter is going to have a problem with you on, when they really ought to be for you because you agree with them on 9 big issues that they care about. It's that 10th one that you're probably not on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be in a different chapter, but you're not on the same page, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
So how do you keep focusing on, hey, look, I'm a whole lot better. You ought to be in agreement with me a whole lot more than my opponent because they're against you on 9 out of 10. It's that one issue that y'all agree about, and so how do you focus on the positive and not the negative, if that makes sense? And there's an art to that, and you can't know it. A lot of it is practice and development, and interpersonal skills of people. I've seen people who are terrific. They'll be terrific in office, but they can't. Their retail political skills are really, a lot of people aren't people, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing interviews here, right? So
Right.
you need your people you're interviewing. You need them to talk. Well,
Right.
Sometimes you probably are going to have to work on drawing it out of them. Maybe not with me, but with some people you're going to have to work at it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And there's that practice and there's an art to it. And so it's. I always thought I would be doing that kind of thing, and really didn't seriously think I'd ever get into elective office. And when it became clear to me that I was going to run for the North Carolina Senate back in 2010, that was a real wake up call. I never expected to find myself in that position at that age and the place I was in my life. My kids were young. My law practice was really hitting its stride. I was making good money. Things were running well. We were very busy,
Mm-hmm.
and on paper it didn't make any sense that would be when I would run, and it made no sense at all.
Well, what inspired you to run then?
Well, I'm trying to think how to say this. So I'll be honest with you. I was chairman of my local party in Wilson, and Barack Obama had been elected president, and I had worked really hard doing those other things that I had talked about, helping candidates. As I said, I was chairman of the local party, and I was giving a lot of myself, and
Right.
I was real frustrated with what was going on in the country, and I'd gotten in a really bad habit of getting up early in the morning and drinking way too much coffee and watching a lot of TV news, and back then reading the News Observer, and so reading a lot of what I would consider to be frustrating bad news, and just finding myself at about 8 o'clock in the morning really amped up, really not in a good place,
Right.
Mentally, emotionally, little, as my wife would say, that's her word, not mine, but just kind of ready to, and this is kind of awkward to how to say it, but I found myself, getting ready to go to work, shaving. I remember it vividly. I was shaving and kind of looking in the mirror, and just sort of lamenting, what else can I do? Almost talking to myself, thinking about what was going on in the world. I don't remember what the issue was that morning that had set me off. I'm sure it was something Barack Obama had done, and it doesn't matter. It had just gotten under my skin. My nerves were raw. My political nerves were really raw, and I just sort of said out loud, God, what else can I do? And I heard a voice, and he told me specifically to run against my opponent. And I heard a voice that made me turn around. My bathroom's kind of small. I don't mean to get too personal about it, but I was going, who is behind me? How could there be somebody behind me? And it felt like somebody spoke right behind me, and I don't know how to explain it. It was just, I literally turned. I'm looking in the mirror, so I could see there was nobody behind me. There wasn't even room for somebody to really stand behind me, and not without me knowing they were there, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And but I turned, and I honestly, I thought I was losing my mind, and that was kind of the first thought, is like, am I losing it? I need to calm down here, and but that's it. And I finally screwed up the courage to tell my wife what had happened. That was not a conversation that I was looking forward to at all, and I'm really glad that when I did, there was a kitchen counter between me and my wife, and she was not at all pleased to hear me say that I thought that this is what I needed to do, and told me so in no uncertain terms, and I think her words were along the lines of, if you think you're going to go gallivanting off to Raleigh and leave me here with these 3 kids, you have either lost your mind or you got another thing coming, or something like that. And that's kind of the way I remember it. And me thinking, yeah, this is going about like I expected it to go. So, I'm probably sharing a lot more than I should, but the long and short of that is, I told her, now look, you guys are young guys, so you're not married. Maybe this will be helpful to somebody somewhere. But I was pretty convinced that God was not telling me to get divorced, right, by running for office. And so I had thought about that quite a bit before I talked to her. That I knew she wasn't going to be in favor of this. And sometimes spouses will answer a spouse saying something big like that. Okay, honey, or dear, that's okay, fine, let's do it, and then sometimes you kind of know that it's gonna take some time, and so I just made it really clear to her that I really thought that's what God wanted me to do. But I was also sure that God didn't want me divorced, and wasn't telling me to do something that would get me divorced. And so she had a veto, and until she changed her mind, that I wasn't doing anything like that, but that I needed her to understand that's what I thought he was telling me to do. And it wasn't just run for any old office; it was run for a specific office against a specific person. That he named the person. And I had this person was not somebody that was on my short list of who I thought needed to be gotten out of office.
Right.
It wasn't like they were at the top of my political bad list, if that makes sense. And that was part of what made me realize that I wasn't just making this up, because where did that come from? Anyway, let me wrap that up by saying because I could talk way too long about that. I told her if he really wanted me to do this, then he would change her mind. And at first she got mad about that, because she thought that meant I was going to keep bringing it up and pestering her about it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to bring it up. I said, it'll bring itself up. And it did. Fenner, I'm not joking. It did. I was on the radio one day. Jam in 99 used to do this morning show thing, and I had a habit of, as chairman, going on, it was kind of an open mic, and I'd go there, and we were talking about an issue about electricity and rates, and so I started kind of saying that, our leaders weren't doing anything about this problem, and they needed to investigate and see, they needed to look into it instead of just saying there's nothing we can do. And I kid you not, a friend of ours called the house because he didn't have my cell phone number. He couldn't remember my cell phone number, I think is what he said. He called and left a message that I ought to run for office, that I was exactly right, and da-da-da-da. And my wife thought I'd put him up to it. And I was like, I swear, this is totally random. And then one time she saw something on the news, and she was like, I swear, someone ought to. And I was just sat there and grinned at her, and she was like, shut up, just shut up. And I was like, I didn't say anything. And it went on, and things like that kept happening. And long story short, right before the deadline, maybe the last few days, she was like, well, maybe I'm thinking maybe it'd be okay if you did. And I was like, nope, that's not good enough. I can't do this unless you're 100% on board. This is not something that I can start doing and you be unhappy with what's going on, and then you tell me I got to quit. It doesn't work like that. I quit when the election day is over and the votes are counted, and then I may have a job or I may not. I honestly didn't know that I was going to win. It wasn't. I didn't think God was telling me I was going to win. He was just telling me to run.
Right.
And I told her that. I was like, I don't know that I'm going to win. But she started asking questions. Well, do you think you can win? Because that matters. People. I'm like, I think I can win. I'm not saying I will win, but I can see a path on how to win, and I don't find it to be like a Hail Mary. I would say I was definitely the underdog, and I was, and I told her that, but not, I can't do it. It's and it was a tough fight, and we came out on top, and so then I was in office for 3 terms, which in the legislature we had 2-year terms, so 6 years. And then in 2016 I ran for Attorney General and didn't win that. You said you mentioned that you might ask me about that, so I've talked enough about how I was more than I probably should have shared in detail about how I came to run for office when I did, but. I always thought it would be more like the age that I am now or older that I ran for, if I ever ran for office, and that was just my Buck's vision. But that wasn't what the Lord had in store for me. And it's been a good ride, and I've really enjoyed it. But I've also made a lot of good friends. But I've also felt like I've had a good impact, and some of the things that we were able to do before, I saw the benefits of that manifest itself, well after I was out of office. So, there you go. Let me let you ask me some more questions. I want to cover what you want to cover.
Could you describe like the difference between running for state senate and running for attorney general?
Oh wow, yeah, big difference.
Really?
Yeah, state of North Carolina is I suspect most people listening to this will be people who've either born and raised here or lived here a long time, probably most of them, and we tend to think of North Carolina as but it's a big state, and at the time about 10 million people. Now they say we're about 11 million. And, I had traveled over my lifetime extensively through North Carolina. I'd gone to college in the mountains in Boone at Appalachian State. And, being from eastern North Carolina, spent a lot of time on the coast and just about everywhere else. And it is there are some far reaches in North Carolina. But one of the things I learned that's similar is that in a way, people are the same everywhere you go. Everybody's got similar problems, similar issues, similar concerns. Yeah, so if you live in Raleigh, your concerns about government might be a little different than if you live in Rocky Mount, or if you live out in Red Oak, or you live out in Battleboro, somewhere, somewhere out in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere rural. Yeah, there's some differences there, but people, the concerns that people have, they want their kids to get a good education. They want to feel safe. They don't want to feel like government's taking everything they've got. They want to feel like they have an opportunity. They want to feel like they want to be confident that they have a brighter future, either for themselves or their kids or their grandkids. They're concerned about, most people are concerned about paying their bills. Honestly, a lot of people are concerned about, am I going to be able to pay my rent this month, or my house payment, or my, if you're a business owner, am I going to make payroll? Am I going to be able to pay my quarterly tax estimate if you're self-employed? People have generally the same kind of concerns and hopes and aspirations. They're worried about their mom, and are they going to, they're going to be able to take care of their mom as their mom gets older, or they, are the kids doing well in school, or they running with the crowd they shouldn't run with, or they're going to get into the right college, or there's similar concerns everywhere, the mountain accent is pretty different from a eastern North Carolina accent, kind of that Tidewater type accent, right? And there's different accents in this state all over the place, but people are the same. Everybody's got a crazy Aunt Sally, or a ne'er-do-well cousin, or everybody's got that, or a rock star, uncle or aunt, everybody's got a family history, and everybody's got skeletons in their closet, and everybody's got trouble. It doesn't matter how well they're doing financially. Everybody's got problems. Everybody's got issues. You can be the richest guy or the richest girl, having all these business successes, and your nephew or your niece or your kid, somebody's dealing with addiction or mental health issues. So that's one of the things that running statewide really taught me, and it's the same as running in a district. When you run in a district, it's so much more condensed. It is a lot more. It should be a lot more people intensive. A lot more oriented towards grassroots. When you're running statewide, it is just impossible to. There's just too many people that you need to reach, and you have to raise a lot of money. And if you don't raise a lot of money, you have a really hard time having a chance to win, because when you're talking about 10 million people and 4.5 to 6 million voters in a given election, you cannot shake everybody's hand. You just can't be seen at every rally, and there's a million things going on all at the same time all across the state. So how do you pick and choose? And you can't afford a helicopter, you can't afford a plane to parachute in and get from one end of the state to the other in one day. I did that when I was running for Attorney General. I did a Trump rally in I think it was Cornelius. I can't even remember now. Out near maybe it was Cabarrus County, somewhere right outside of Charlotte. I'm trying to remember now where it was. And then I did the Selma rally here in Johnson, down in Johnson County, and they, as the nominee, President Trump, at the time candidate Trump, the rallies were a big thing, and I liked to call it the sort of the opening act, or the pregame show, if you want to call it that. And so I think once his campaign learned that I could be a decent speaker, and that I was going to talk about issues, and I could talk about issues that dovetailed with what the presidential campaign wanted to talk about, then they were very anxious to have me come and show up for these things, which is a big boost to my campaign.
Right.
But and so I remember doing that, and so they had other people that were flying between these two things, and so they arranged for me to have a seat on somebody's plane in order to get there in time, and that was a wild day.
Sure,
that was a wild day. And I'll never forget standing up in Selma. It was just getting dark, starting to get dark. It was still light, in the sky, like how sunsets will do, and kind of stand up there at that podium and basically see this sea of people. It was very kind of surreal, and I'll never forget that one as long as I live. I have no idea what I said. I'm pretty sure nobody that was in the crowd remembers what I said either, but it seemed to get a few cheers, and it was a lot of fun, and but it was a tough campaign, and I was really heavily outspent, and about 4-1, and I'd raised more money as an Attorney General candidate at that point than any Republican had. I raised probably about pretty close to $1.5 million, which is really sounds like a whole lot of money, doesn't it?
For a statewide race, you need a whole lot of money.
But it is nothing for a statewide race, nothing. And a lot of people don't understand that. And if there's one thing I can share with your listeners is your candidates need your financial help, even if it's $10, even if it's $25. It's the gas that makes the car go, and if you don't, otherwise it's like running on a battery. When it runs out, and you're done. And it was very frustrating to lose. I lost by about 20,000 votes out of about 4.5, a little over 4.5 million votes, and to be outspent that way and was tough, and that was my first loss, and hopefully my only loss. but that was my first loss, and it was hard on the family. It was hard on my wife. My wife was not doesn't love this, and she feels strongly about issues and about policy and about she believes I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but she doesn't like doing it. She doesn't like being having to be a part of it. She likes people, but she doesn't really. She's not like behind me, shoving me forward. Sometimes you have a spouse that's really kind of encouraging their spouse to do something like that. That's not my wife. She's not holding me back at all. She's very supportive. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but she was. It really bothered her a lot. I think she had to have a lot of conversations with God about like she thought we were doing what we were supposed to be doing, so why did we lose? But that's not the way it works. That's not the way God works. We don't know. He had a reason. I'm satisfied. He had it happened the way he wanted it to happen, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons about it, and most of which are too deep and too personal to really share here. But some good political lessons. I made a lot of friends across the state, a lot of good people out there. That's one of the things I kept telling my wife after we lost. We wouldn't know this couple, and we wouldn't know these people, and we wouldn't have done this, and we wouldn't have seen that, and we wouldn't know about this. You have to look for the blessings sometimes in this hard work that campaigning and political work can be, and there are a lot of them. And if you look at your glass half full and you see we've made some really close friends through that campaign. They're still very close to us today. That people we travel with, and it's not about the politics. It's about the relationships, and that matters. My kids learned a lot of lessons, so it was, while it was a tough one to take, it was, I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't change it. I mean, even though it hurts to think about losing again like that way, it was, I wouldn't change it. And I never thought I would find myself back in the legislature again, but here I am again, back in the Senate, and didn't expect that either, and didn't look for it, just kind of thought that season was over, and that, I mean, I'm in my mid-50s, so I'm not that old in politics, but I feel like I've lived a couple of lifetimes already, and I've got a lot politically, and that I've got a lot of lessons that I learned. It's been real healthy for me to go back, having been out of office for 6 years. Mm-hmm. That gave me a very new perspective on my job, and I think I'm a lot more relaxed about it, a lot more focused in terms of, okay, now is when I really, really just try to, I'll say, bust through the brick wall, right? And, other moments I go, no, that's not marinated long enough. Let's wait a little bit longer and push on. It's not time to push on that yet. Even though I want it really bad and wanted it yesterday and the day before that, but now it's not ripe. It's not ready, and it's really changed my perspective about how we're viewed when we're in office by our constituents, and because I think it's really easy to kind of get in a little bubble up there and think that everybody's paying attention to what you're doing. Most people aren't paying attention to what you're doing until it's election time. Mm-hmm. They don't know. That's why things like this are great, because they can, if they're interested, and they can pull it up later on, and they can watch it again some other time. Don't have to watch it today, but kind of know who people are and what they stand for, what drives them. And look, I don't do the legislature. A lot of people think we make a bunch of money, and we $13,900. I lose a lot of money.
It's basically a volunteer job, yeah.
And it's a full-time job, and that's the way I approached it differently this time. When I was in there before, my kids were young. They were all still either high school or younger, and they really were all middle school and younger when I first got elected, and. So it was hard. I was fortunate to be close enough to Raleigh. I could commute, so I really didn't miss them a lot. I mean, I could be there when I really needed to be there, and a lot of breakfasts that I cooked before they went to school and I went to Raleigh, and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it was tough, and I kind of burned the candle from both ends, as they say, between work, as in my day job with my law practice, and trying to be a dad and a husband, and then trying to be a good legislator. It was tough. My oldest son teases me. He says that's when he started calling me Snowflake back then, because my hair started turning gray, and you are one. You know how teenage boys can be, right? So he was giving me a hard time, and in a good way. And but I decided going back when I decided to run, and then. Was pretty sure I was going to be able to win. I thought long and hard and prayed long and hard about it, and decided, no, I'm going to try to be the best full-time legislator I can be. And while I still practice law a little bit, I don't. My practice is I've turned that way down, so to speak, and so I know how to manage that flow a lot better than I did then, and so it's been good. I feel like I've been able to get some things done. My seniority is not where I left off, so I am more senior than most of than probably any of the others that got elected with me this last time. You know, and but you got to manage that. You know, so people don't. You know, there's a lot of personalities. You got to manage that sort of thing, and I just feel like I have a lot more. Obviously, a lot more experience and knowledge with it, and feel like I'm in a better place to handle it better. Thought I did it pretty well before, but feel much better equipped about it now, and enjoying it, and don't have any hard fixed agenda. I think God's taught me to be loose and be able to pivot and move when I need to move, and not have my plan, you know, that I'm going to impose over what his ideas are for me to do. And it's been a lot more, I feel like I've been a lot more productive and efficient, and certainly a lot less stressed, and having a lot more fun with it than, and it was fun before, but a lot more fun with it now. It's also different now. You didn't ask the question, but I'll say that for your listeners. It's very different now than it was when I first got elected before. When I got elected before in 2010 and took office in 2011, the Republicans had not been in charge in the Senate for like 134 years, I think it was. So, and the state was pretty broken. There's a lot of parallels between what President Trump's trying to do now in Washington and what we were doing in Raleigh for the state of North Carolina then. We had to really turn the state around. The state probably wasn't anywhere near quite as bad off as I think Washington is, but it was still pretty broken. And so we were very reform-oriented. You know, we were not trying to break the eggs, but we knew we were going to have to crack some eggs. You know, we weren't trying to burn the house down, but we knew we had to knock a few walls out, if that kind of analogy makes sense, you know. And we had to get to where the termites had undermined the foundation, undermined the framing in the house, so that, and you had to knock some walls out to get to it. You know, you had to dismantle some things to build it back right. And you know, now, so it was politically, there was a lot of, in my mind, a lot of low hanging fruit. You know, a lot of things that were. It was a no-brainer. Everybody could agree. That was in the majority. Everybody agreed we needed to do this. This was the plan. It wasn't hard to. Now we're much more in a governing mode, right? So we've kind of, for simplistic terms, kind of fixed the state tax code. There's always more work to do, but regulations, tax code, spending, a lot of the issues that we would call the regulatory environment. A lot of the issues we would kind of call a little bit cultural issues, you know, Second Amendment issues, things like that. We've kind of got on the right path about most of those things. Not that they don't need more work, but that a lot of that was changing at almost 180 degrees, you know, from night to day, right? Now it's more about governing, so it's a little bit more about course correction, a little bit more about marginal improvements or I don't mean trivial, but marginal redirection. You know, emphasize this a little bit more, emphasize that a little bit less. We don't need to spend so much money there, or we ought to be able to do more with less over there than, or this doesn't require as much money. And I speak about money a lot because that's a lot of what the job is, you know. And this is new, we need more. This is a good program. The data is showing this is successful. We need to really put some more money here. So let's shift from here to here, you know. And how do we keep driving down tax codes? And how do we keep regulation from getting overbearing, and you know, more efficient? You know, how can we keep the permits that ought to be moving quickly as opposed to taking a year to get the stupid permit? You know. Does that literally require hiring more state employees, or is it that we need to get under the hood and tinker with it more and get the timing right? You know, and most of it now is it's very important because it's very much about keeping in the right direction. But it's I like to call it course correction. You know, we're getting a little bit too far to the east. We need to be a little bit more to the north, if that makes sense, or whatever direction on the compass you want. We're getting a little offline, and so having had the experience of been there for 6 years when we were doing all that work, I have a lot of institutional memory that I can remind folks. But there's also things that were changing from when we did it, almost the opposite direction, because we found out some of the things we did then they didn't work out so well. An example of that, this is kind of getting in the weeds, but just to be quick, an example of that is when we were in office before, we did a lot of pushing together a lot of government agencies into this department called Department of Public Safety. And over time, and we pushed together, we mashed together a lot of law enforcement, legal, prisons, juvenile justice, all this stuff, kind of mashed it all together under this one big, massive department. Since that time, we've basically broken it all apart so that they're all in their different departments. And, that's a real difference.
Right.
And that's a night and day kind of difference. And I think it's generally the right thing to do, because I think we found that this idea of mashing it all together in one great big massive department wasn't anywhere near we didn't get the efficiencies that we thought we would get, and more importantly, it was much harder to employ oversight that the legislature needed to employ. Make sure the money was being spent the way we had directed it, where we directed it, and not when you put it all in this big department, it kind of gets all mixed up in the shuffle, And the department's doing this good and this good and this good, and they need more money for those things, but they're doing this terrible, this terrible, this terrible. Well, how do you cut here and give money there? A lot of times the way you make government bureaucracy do the way it's supposed to is to say, we're going to cut you because you're not doing it the way you're supposed to do it. I mean, that's one of the levers you have. Mm-hmm. So when it's all one big pot, how do you hold them accountable for what they're not doing right, at the same time you're trying to reward and encourage what they're doing right? But if you've broken it up in different agencies, if this agency's doing poorly and that agency's doing great, you can have better oversight, and you can. And I'm being very simplistic in explaining this, but so I think that's the right thing to start breaking it up. And so we didn't do everything right. We did most things right, but we didn't do everything right. And so you learn.
Mm-hmm.
You make the right call that you can make at the time. And for me, I'm very strictly governed by my government philosophy, and that gets challenged sometimes. My colleagues want to do something that I think philosophically is not what a conservative and a Republican ought to be doing. And it seems to be growing government, for example, as opposed to figuring out how to get government out of the way. And you gotta roll. Sometimes you have to, as they say, fix that. Put as much lipstick on that pig as you can before you send it on its way. But anyway, I've rambled on for a while. So Fenner, let me ask me some more questions, and we'll, I don't know how.